Okay, so why don't we move over, Regina, I see that you put something in the chat. Do you want to say anything about Jobs First up in North State right now?
I posted in the chat just a little update that I received from Courtney Farrell, who works out of Chico State. I wasn't able to attend the meeting last week. I believe it was May the 9th, and it was held at the Plumas County Fairgrounds. Mike, I think I heard you mention that you're from that area, so I'm curious if you were invited or even knew about it to attend. But they were getting a group of folks together to discuss the governance structure, like how they're going to put committees for decision making. The first round of some catalyst funding, and then some steps and discussion about how they're going to implement and set up a rubric. I haven't received a summary from the meeting yet, but I'm sure Courtney will probably have that to me in another week or so.
Great, thanks. Yeah, Mike, have you participated in that at all?
No, I wasn't aware of it. I don't live up there, so I probably miss more than I see, but I didn't participate in that.
Do you know the program that we're discussing right now?
I don't.
Yeah, so it's a statewide initiative that has been it goes out into different regional groups. So it's an effort to bring infrastructure investment out into different California regions, and food and ag and specifically meat are some of the focus areas. And so Regina is kind of a point person from our group working with North State on the meat sector to try to identify potential infrastructure projects that could help the whole meat producing community.
Got it. Thank you. I see it in the chat now. It looks
Okay.
like a good initiative. Definitely.
It is. And if you're interested, I would encourage you to reach out to Regina and get some more details about getting involved with that.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Good. Has anyone else in other regions interacted with Jobs First at all over the last month or so? Not seeing any. I attended a North Bay Area. Oh, Ahmad, go ahead.
Yes. My organization and another person who I know was selected to be a part of the Jobs First work group, at least where we are. I'm in Stockton, and we have a tri-county coalition here. And where we are in our process is a work group, and I've been invited to a work group there. So we'll see what we learn and whatever is shareable. I'm happy to share it in this space, especially specifically pertaining to the work we're aligned around.
Great, fantastic, Ahmad. And then okay, thanks, Regina. And yeah, so I participated in a sub-regional meeting for the Bay Area, and the discussion really was around the Catalyst funding. So there's several different stages of funding. So Catalyst funding is meant to help move projects from sort of conceptual to shovel-ready projects. So that's kind of in the pipeline already across the regions, but then there's going to be the subsequent actual implementation funding to move projects from shovel-ready into actually implementing them. And that's going to happen at some point over the summer, I believe. Those projects will be selected. Okay, well, let's move out of the updates, and why don't we turn it over to Jessica, and she'll take us through RegenScore.
Sorry, I'm muted. Thank you, Patrick. Yeah, I'll go ahead and share my screen. I've got some slides. At some point in the slides, I'll jump over to a web page, so just bear with me or let me know if for some reason you can't see it. But without further ado, I can go ahead and pull this up. Can everyone see this all right?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I'm here to talk a little bit about RegenScore, and I'll give a kind of overview about our program in general, just kind of how the whole thing works, a little bit of background on how we came together. And then I'll kind of walk through a little bit of the relevant sort of information around our onboarding survey, specifically to kind of rangeland and pasture systems in this context. I'll talk a little bit about how we approach outcomes monitoring as well as verification, and then go through a little high level of our scoring system, as well as the methodologies that we've used to develop them. So yeah, just kind of a little bit of a background. We started actually as a Google Food Lab accelerator, brought together about 100 different stakeholders, from farmers and ranchers to technical service providers, academics, extension specialists, purchasers from food service providers to retailers to consumer packaged good brands, folks from nonprofits and NGOs, folks who focus on communications and storytelling. And we all came together around this question of how do you define regenerative agriculture? How do you monitor and verify it? And then importantly, how do you scale it across broad acreage? And as a group, we kind of landed on these 4 kind of core commitments. We wanted to create something that was farmer first, that was evidence-backed, that recognized the importance of context and was place-based, but importantly, that was market-driven so that we could actually be de-risking and incentivizing these practices for growers as they transition. We essentially came up with what we call a unified adaptive framework. I'll get a little bit more into the details of this as we go through the presentation, but we basically wanted to recognize all existing certification standards, approaches to verifications, as well as the myriad of practices that growers may use to implement regenerative and outcomes they may use to monitor their results, and translate that into an easy, accessible, easy to understand tool for purchasers so that they can justify their purchasing decisions, and find the balance between creating something that's inclusive and brings all growers along, that recognizes the need to transition large acreage without kind of falling prey to issues around greenwashing, so to speak. And so this is actually just a snapshot from our website. There's a number of other different certification standards, verification approaches we recognize, and I'll kind of get into that a little more detailed soon. But as I mentioned, kind of our approach is to, I'm sorry, this slide looks like it's a little off-centered for some reason, but our approach is to kind of meet growers where they're at, recognizing that there's many roads to regenerative, and that it's a journey of continual improvement. And so I mentioned kind of right there on that last slide that there's this singular RegenScore that integrates all these different components of a management system and different approaches to MRV, or monitoring, reporting, and verification. But essentially, when a grower goes through our onboarding survey, which I'll share a little bit more about with you soon, that score that they're given at the end places them into one of these 3 categories. So either transitional, continual improvement, or regenerative. And transitional, actually, Leo will talk to you a lot about that work. We have a member of our steering committee who's also a member of Zero Foodprint, and we've kind of just, recognize the importance of the work they're doing around transitional finance. And again, in order to kind of curtail greenwashing, but still provide a way for growers to get on the train. We have kind of at the lowest bar from 0 to 60 points is our transitional category. There's a very low barrier to entry in that category. You essentially have to be implementing just one sort of climate smart soil health conservation management practice. There's a limit of 2 years that you can stay in that category. Beyond that, it's not like you're kicked out for life. It's just that in order to re-enter, you have to score into the continual improvement category or higher. And in order to move into that next category, you do have to establish a baseline for monitoring, but there's no monitoring requirement just to enter the program. Once the grower moves into the continual improvement category, which is 60 to 80 points, is where they would actually get market access. So they would appear in our grower database, where purchasers can filter by the myriad of practices, outcomes, and verification approaches that align with their procurement strategies, and identify growers at different stages of the journey. And so here there's a bit of a larger requirement around practices implemented. There's a bit of a longer duration that you can remain in this category. Then as you move on to the regenerative category, you can stay there forever. There is, again, a higher requirement around practices implemented and outcomes monitored. And again, we'll touch on that a little bit in a moment. So kind of the principles that we've, I guess I should take a step back and just say that while we recognize that there's many roads to get there and we want to honor the different practices growers may be using to result in regenerative outcomes, we believe that the principles are fairly universal. And so we've created a number of different onboarding surveys or question sets around specific production systems. But essentially the principles appear over and over again, whether it's our cropland question set, orchards, vineyards, rangeland, dairy, or pastures. We're kind of looking to see what growers are doing to engage in their community, what they're doing to reduce disturbance, to keep the ground covered, tighten nutrient cycles, reduce external inputs, optimize water use, promote biodiversity, ensure worker welfare, ensure animal welfare, and to monitor outcomes. And so in addition to sort of our principle-based questions or our, questions that help us get at the practices growers are using to achieve regeneration on the ground, we also have a series of outcomes-based questions that we ask that get at kind of the ecosystem co-benefits that the growers are achieving. And those are framed around soil health, air quality, water, biodiversity, and equity or worker welfare. And so the way this kind of all comes together is you go through our onboarding survey, you receive a single RegenScore, you're placed into one of these three categories: transitional, continual improvement, or regenerative. You get these 5 ecosystem co-benefit scores, kind of recognizing that a single score may be reductionist, and we want to provide a little more granular detail to a purchaser. Maybe they have procurement strategies specifically around biodiversity or specifically around soil health or equity, and they want to see growers who are excelling in those areas. And then I'll get into this a little bit more on a subsequent slide, but we really also have a strong commitment to grower data privacy and data autonomy. And so depending on the grower's selection of what they want to opt into, that may be all the information that a purchaser has access to. But if the grower authorizes sharing of more detailed information, then purchasers would essentially be able to see every practice, every outcome, and every verification approach that contributes to each of these individual scores. And so kind of in that same vein that I mentioned, we've worked a lot with a group that maybe some of you have heard of called Open Team, and have aligned with their sort of data use agreements. I can share links to this if anyone's interested, but they essentially have an ag data oath of care that can be used between a grower and the advisor that's supporting them in an onboarding process. The bill of data rights, which kind of goes through all the rights that are guaranteed to a producer when they share their data in a platform such as this, and the mechanisms that we use to control that data. And then finally, they have a data hosting and storage agreement, which kind of shows how this data will be held and secured to protect it in the grower's interest. So kind of just to give a little more details on our onboarding survey, I mentioned kind of these principle-based and practice and outcomes-based approaches. But also just to kind of give a little more context, and I won't get into all of it because we don't have enough time, but we basically have a series of questions that ask the grower about their background, how long they've been farming, whether it's, kind of the demographics of the ownership of the farm. We ask a series of questions about their markets, kind of the products that they're selling, how they sell, if they sell any value-added products. We ask about programs they're participating in. So do they have any existing certifications? This one's important because it helps us to pre-populate answers to future questions. Again, kind of the work we've done with Open Team, there's this commitment to minimizing the burden of data entry, or this principle of entering data once and using it multiple times. And so, if you've already done a certification, there's things we may know about your management that we can auto-populate. It also serves as a method of verification, which I'll talk about in a moment. We ask sort of what management plans they may have in place, what technical assistance providers they may be working with. Also, it's not shown here, but any networks or hubs they may be participating in, and other ways they may be contributing to their community, whether they source their food, sell their food to their local food system, and things of that nature. Moving into kind of the principle-based questions, I mentioned that I'm going to kind of click a link that's going to take me to an external site. So just let me know if you can see this. Did a page pop up, or do I need to shift my screen share? No?
I think you need
Okay.
to shift your screen share.
I'm just gonna change my screen share really quickly. I apologize for that. Okay, how about now? No, that's not the one.
Nope, not seeing it.
If I do desktop, then I worry you're gonna have to see yourselves looking back at you. Okay, how about now?
No.
Nope.
No, okay. Sorry. In that case, I'm just gonna reshare. Apologies for that. How about now?
We're seeing a sheep with a pasture
All right.
lip on the left.
Good. Okay. I won't dwell on these too much just in the interest of time, but just to kind of give you a high level understanding. We have a question set around pastures. Like I said, there's these universal principles, what you're doing to reduce disturbance, for instance. For some of the questions, it's pretty straightforward. We just ask them to report how many acres they're doing it on, like the percent acreage or total acreage that they have under that practice. For some, there may be some more detailed follow-up questions that we ask, like how many paddocks you rotate through. If you're excluding livestock, like which specific areas are you excluding them from? Carrying on, what are you doing to keep the ground covered? Same thing. There may be some follow-up questions, about how much of the surface is covered, how long you have green cover throughout the year, what you're doing to tighten nutrient cycles, what you're doing to promote biodiversity. If anyone needs me to stop on any of these, just feel free to jump in, but I'm just going to move through them for the interest of time. What are you doing to maximize water use efficiencies? There's a series of questions around dairy as well. I'm just going to hop over to the range systems. Again, what you're doing to reduce disturbance and a series of potential follow-up questions, keep the ground covered, same sort of thing. The idea that you're seeing here on the right is that there is a term library. You're just seeing the kind of filler text for now, but essentially we have a library that if there's terms that come up in this onboarding questionnaire that are unfamiliar to someone, that they would be able to see the definitions of those terms. I'll talk a little bit more about this little hexagon figure in a moment, but we also have worked with a group to create this visual language of food and what are called lexicons that kind of help further educate people on some of these practices and potential outcomes being achieved. So again, a bunch of questions around animal welfare, and these would be relevant to the questions that you've answered earlier in terms of what animals you are included in your management system. So you wouldn't get all of these question sets, you would just get the ones based on what you've indicated in the earlier question sets. I'm just gonna, sorry, but quickly switch back to the presentation. Oopsies. Okay. And so after you are asked a bunch of questions about the practices you're using to implement these regenerative principles, we have a series of questions that ask kind of what you're doing to monitor outcomes. And I mentioned the sort of ecosystem co-benefits we're looking at, and just to kind of show a little bit of a deeper dive on those, if a grower indicates that they're monitoring soil health, we ask them sort of what metrics or indicators they're using to monitor soil health. Depending on which of these they indicate, there will also be follow-up questions, asking what methodologies you may be using, questions about your sampling design, sampling collection, whether you're working with a third party to collect samples or to do your monitoring, or whether you're doing it yourself. Similarly, for air quality, we provide a number of different metrics or indicators that the grower could be tracking. Around water, both quality and quantity, asking about water holding capacity, infiltration rate, total water use, fertilizer use efficiency. These metrics are all related to actual sampling of runoff water, whereas these are kind of more around potentially soil and just kind of input use. Biodiversity, again, a series of different metrics that they may be tracking. And then we would ask follow-up questions about their methods and kind of monitoring protocols. And I'll kind of explain through the scoring system why we ask these questions and kind of how we use them to develop the RegenScore. Lastly, for anything a grower has said that they're doing, any sort of practice they've indicated, and in some cases, outcomes they say that they're monitoring, we provide a number of different pathways for verification. So again, as I mentioned earlier, we kind of try to take this unified approach of saying, you know, if you're already doing a certification, great, we want to give you credit for that. But if you're not doing a certification, or if a certification is cost prohibitive to you, or if it's just like practice prohibitive, because often, you know, certifications are binary and they have specific kind of lists of what you must do or must not do. We really want to provide that flexibility to take folks on a journey. And so while that's one method of verification in our program, we also accept management plans, possible integration with farm management software or equipment data, the ability to upload geotagged timestamped photos or videos, to share satellite imagery or GIS data, lab data, receipts or billing statements, government or official documents. You can provide reports or outputs from online calculators like Crop Track or Crop Manage or Pesticide Risk Tool. You may be working with a technical service provider on the ground who's willing to sign an affidavit that verifies the things you're doing, or you may be able to bring in an ISO certified verifier. From a water perspective, there may be data from irrigation or water or flow meters. And then from a social sort of equity perspective, we can leverage farm worker labor surveys to better understand those kind of labor practices. This, again, will factor into the scoring, which I'll touch on in just a moment. But just to kind of show how it all comes together in our platform and summarize kind of what I've just thrown at you in a lot of detail very quickly. There's these onboarding surveys that the grower can access either on a mobile phone or through a desktop or laptop web app. The onboarding survey asks them questions about their background, practices they're implementing, outcomes they're monitoring, various verification approaches they may be able to use. We are we take very seriously our data privacy and data autonomy. And so we're working on some software solutions so that once that data is entered, it goes through a process or a software that will ensure that their data is protected. And then we also provide the option for growers to opt in rather than opting out. So they can opt in either to share their data publicly, like maybe they're okay with it even being used for marketing and storytelling purposes. They could indicate that they only want it to be shared with purchasers, and that could be broadly with any purchaser in our that may access our grower database, or they may say they only want to share with specific purchasers, like, and indicate purchasers who they're working with that they want to allow this data to be shared with, or they may say they just want to keep it private for now. And so, you know, really giving the grower the autonomy over how that data is used. That said, RegenScore has a commitment to never use the data that's shared for any purposes other than producing their RegenScore unless the grower authorizes it. And so we can aggregate and anonymize for programmatic reporting or for the purchaser's programmatic reporting. But in terms of the data attached to specific farms or names, that's all up to the grower how that's used. So once it comes through our onboarding survey, it goes through a calculator that produces that RegenScore and those 5 ecosystem co-benefit scores I mentioned. And then kind of that's what we have built as of yet, just to clarify where we are in our journey. What our kind of longer term vision is to be able to produce these rich user profiles that can be integrated as an iframe onto a purchaser's website, onto the grower's website, that can be used for marketing and storytelling. I'll talk a little bit about this digital fingerprint you see here in number 3 in a moment, as well as the ability to produce digital stories that are really consumer friendly and can help connect consumers to the people and places that grow their food. And then finally, we have a goal to have like a broader sort of resource library that growers can access. And just as much as we want to be able to ingest data easily from other places and help you auto-populate the answers in your onboarding survey, we also want to make it easy for that data to be ported out, whether it's to access technical assistance, grants, or other financing opportunities. again, kind of this idea of enter data once, use it multiple times, and being able to share data with anyone, but not everyone. And just, I'm getting, okay, there we go. I mentioned the digital fingerprint. During our accelerator phase, we worked on a collaboration with Adobe, the Noun Project, and AIGA, which is a big design firm, where we crowdsourced from designers all over the world, the development of these little, what are called lexicons. And so this is kind of like a visual language of food and agriculture. For every answer in our onboarding survey, there's an icon associated. And so as the grower goes through the onboarding survey, they kind of collect these badges that can produce their sort of digital fingerprint. This is just one sort of visualization of how this could appear, to kind of better tell the story of what they're doing. And then kind of shifting gears from sort of platform and how that kind of the overarching principles behind RegenScore. I'm just going to do a quick overview, if I'm okay on time, of how the scoring framework works.
Yeah, how long do you think this will take? We need to make sure that Leo has some time.
Okay, 2 or 3 minutes, okay?
Yep.
Okay, so I'll just try to go through this pretty quickly. But the way that the scoring breaks down, about 10% of the points go to their background, kind of how they're engaging in their community, training and education that they're involved in. Again, if they're contributing to their local food system. About 50% is principle or practice-based, and the other 40% is outcomes-based. That's what generates the total regen score, but the ecosystem co-benefit scores kind of pull from both practices and outcomes, recognizing that we're not fully there yet on outcomes and being able to drive everything. We know outcomes are an important part of regenerative, but for the most part, growers haven't been collecting this kind of data. And even if they have started, it takes a while to actually accrue benefits. So folks are really just establishing baselines. And so this may change over time as outcomes are better able to inform. But for now, we're kind of at this breakdown. And the way it works is the principle-based scoring for every practice a grower may be doing. There's a base score that's associated with that. And that is multiplied by the percent acreage that they're doing it on as a decimal, and then a verification modifier, which is a number between 0 and 1. And so the more acreage you're doing something on and the more rigorous your verification, the closer you get to maximum points. And the less acreage or the less rigorous the verification, the lower the points for a given practice. All of those are added up, and you can actually even get a score for each principal area, like reduced disturbance or keeping the ground covered. But those, in addition to our outcomes-based score, give your total regen score, and also contribute to the ecosystem co-benefit scores. And so there's again a base score associated for each metric. So if we're talking about soil health, there's a score associated with soil carbon or with bioavailable nitrogen. That's multiplied by a modifier for the rigor of the methodology. So in the case of soil carbon, if you're using dry combustion versus loss on ignition versus mass spectroscopy. A multiplier for the rigor of the sampling design, and then whether they're doing the monitoring themselves or with a third party. There's also kind of a long-term goal to include level of improvement. Again, people are really just starting to understand what the potential for improvement is. And so we don't want to judge someone based on their improvement if we don't know, like for instance, if they've maintained soil carbon, in some contexts, that may be a net positive, because maybe business as usual is losing carbon. And so we're kind of holding out for the science in that area. With things like input use, water, diesel, pesticides, fertilizers, it's a little more straightforward, and we can include that now based on kind of ranges of levels of reduction. But for some of the metrics that we're still learning about, we're kind of going to evolve as the science evolves. And then just to give you kind of like where this all comes from, how we kind of come up with those base scores for the principal areas and the outcome areas. We're using a process called multi-criteria decision analysis. I know it's a big word, but it's a 2-part process that starts with a literature review phase or evidence synthesis. Again, we're very focused on being context specific. So we look for literature in that specific region and production system. If we can't find it in California, for instance, in the Central Valley, we'll look to other similar climates, other like semi-arid Mediterranean climates like Chile or Western Australia. But we really want to keep it as context specific as possible. And then the next phase is kind of this decision analysis or expert survey process where we ask experts to rank how well different practices contribute to outcomes how well given metrics evaluate our outcome areas, how well given methodologies estimate those metrics, and how well given verification approaches actually verify what we're looking for. And so that's kind of how we get our raw scores. And then, like I said, that kind of goes into those calculations, and all that is used to kind of synthesize the regen score and the co-benefit score. So thank you. I'm sorry if I went a little over the 3 minutes there. And yeah, if anyone has questions, I don't know if we're saving that for the end or if people want to follow up offline, but.
Great, thanks, Jessica. There were a couple questions in the chat. One, are you willing to share the deck that you just showed?
Yes.
Okay, great. So maybe you can send that to Doris and we'll just get it out to the group.
Yes.
Then from Matthew Delbar, is there a way to integrate ranch management software that producers could already be using?
That is the hope, is to be able to make it much more interoperable and kind of plug and play. And that's kind of some of the work that we're working on right now, is kind of being able to map those things out so that, you know, then we can create the actual technology for it as well. But yeah, I guess in the case of the software, it could be a lot more plug and play. And again, the grower would have to authorize the sharing. But the idea is, as much as we can auto-populate answers, the better.
Right. And then Matthew Lang had a question about collecting animal welfare data, but
Yes.
didn't see reference to it in the weighting.
Yeah, so that comes up in the outcome scoring. And so yeah, there would be a base metric. Well, actually, sorry, animal welfare would come up in the practice-based scoring. So same thing, there would be a core or a base value associated with the specific practice, the specific animal welfare practice. And then depending on how much of your operation you're doing that on and how you can verify it, that would modify the score. So that factors into kind of the total regen score. There is also the idea of developing an outcomes-based metric for animal welfare specifically, but we're kind of, that has not begun yet.
Okay, so I want to kick over to Leo, Matthew Lang, and Sam. If you can maybe just contact Jessica individually, that'd be great to answer your other questions on here. But we want to make sure that Leo has some time here. Go ahead, Leo.
Great, thanks. I want to make sure everyone can see the deck.
Yep.
Great. All right. I'm Leo Beckerman, Director of Zero Foodprint. And we'll be talking about a little bit about Zero Foodprint and also some of the funding opportunities that we have. But before we do, just want to give too fast. Zero Foodprint was founded and started in 2015, really primarily actually looking at the restaurant industry. So I see we've got some restaurant folks here. I'm glad to be amongst a mixed company, both on the food supply and actually getting it to people. So what we started doing in 2015 was really looking at the impact of restaurants, essentially conducting life cycle assessments in a more kind of what was appropriate at the time, but I think we've moved on from the sort of thinking around carbon neutral. And what we found was, regardless of the restaurant type, whether you were a plant-based, for dine-in only, or meat and potatoes in to-go containers, about 3/4 of that food print was really coming from the ingredients themselves. So no amount of turning off lights or switching from gas to electric and things like that. Really, we found that what we could do was take a laser focus into the ingredients. And we realized that focusing on ingredients was a massive, massive endeavor. And so our approach to this is that these huge things really require all of us to work together. And so you can see here, a few cents from every purchase adds up. And originally what we started is working with restaurants to contribute 1% of their sales to go towards either carbon offsets. But now what we do is we provide those that 1% sales as grants to producers. And so this is an example of one of our members, essentially providing 1%. And then what they get in exchange is sort of this storytelling ability and a way to convey to their customers, their constituents, et cetera, what they're doing and how they're participating in making change on acres and changing the food supply. And I highlight this Subway example because this is a member that we have, a Subway franchisee. And I bring this up in particular because, so much of what we envision is this sort of farm to table or chef going to the farmer's market. And we all know that Subway's not doing that, right? You don't show up at a Subway and it's like a local anything really, or regenerative anything. And this is a way through a small sort of funding, if you will, to continue and to sort of have this be accessible to anybody. Sorry. But as we've grown, really, I think we've made this bigger. It's more than just restaurants. And what we do now is we work with pretty much anybody. We work with businesses, be that a small cafe on the corner, up to a large consumer packaged good, nationwide or international brands. We work with governments and we work with individuals. And so we essentially are a funds aggregator, and we turn that around and give it out as grants to producers. So over the past couple of years, you can see we've had almost 300 projects in 4 states, approaching $3 million awarded. And over the next 5 years, we are on track to award over $15 million in 20 states as this work sort of picks up. So I want to get to what everyone wants to know, and I'll actually have this up a little bit later. I'm going to go into some detail about the grants that are available, but again, I will end and make sure you have the links to everything, so we can go there. So there are 3 major programs that we have available in California right now. One is our ReStore grant, and that is sort of our original program, originally raising funds from restaurants and individuals, and those grants are available for up to $25,000. They do require technical assistance, and they are on a semi-annual application period. So we are just closing our current application, and the new application will come on board probably June or July, with those applications due in September. Then there is quite a bit actually focused on compost, and we'll get to that. But so if you go to, so we've got Compost Connector, again, that's up to $25,000. Those are rolling applications, and we have funding sort of coming in and going out year round. Compost must be purchased in California from a CalRecycle approved facility. And again, we've got that link down there, which I will bring up later as well at the very end while we have any questions and answers. And then we are also providing Healthy Soils grants. So this year, the California Department of Food and Agriculture is doing a new program where they're essentially hiring organizations such as Zero Foodprint to administer their programs, and we are administering compost specific applications. So those are up to $75,000. Again, they do require technical assistance, and I suggest, if anyone is interested, that they would apply by August, because we anticipate that funding will be over by the end of the year. So, sorry. Again, we've talked about the sort of going into ReStore grants, and something that's really important to understand about this one in particular is that this is based on cost effectiveness of modeled carbon sequestration. At the end of the day, what we are sort of telling our funders, be they restaurants or governments, et cetera, we're talking about the soil health benefits of this. And one of the easiest ways to do this is to use sort of the carbon sequestration and modeled carbon sequestration in particular as an analog for the benefits, because it's something that sort of the general population really understands. And so we use the comment planner. I'll get into that in a minute, but this is available for 28 practices. So really anything that the CDFA, that's California Department of Food and Agriculture funds with their HSP program. Let's see. So I just want to give kind of a little bit more perspective. And so the way that we calculate that climate benefit per dollar, that cost per ton, is taking the proposed bid, essentially what somebody's applying to us for that grant, dividing it by what COMET is telling us will be the benefit from that. And from there, we get that dollar per ton of modeled carbon sequestration. And the lower that cost per ton, the more likely it is that someone will receive a grant with available funding. So here's a picture of COMET. Again, this is the CDFA version, the California Department of Food and Agriculture version, and kind of highlighting some of the ways that what they spit out. So, 23 acres here, it would say tells us in this particular example that the CO2 equivalent is going to be 99.1 tons, and this is the source where we kind of plug in our calculations. And so under that cost per ton, you can see what we find in California is that compost application is our #1 funded practice by a mile. And the reason I'm highlighting this is because it gets into kind of why we're so interested in compost. And I think there's a number of reasons, but it's really kind of starting to unlock additional funding opportunities for us, which is what we pass along to producers. So in 2021, a new California law came into effect called SB 1383. And what that is it's requiring statewide that individuals, so individuals are anyone within a city or county who is generating organic waste. Well, now instead of throwing that into the landfill, it must by law be composted. So what we're also seeing with that is that part of the law states that the cities and counties have to use finished compost. And when you tally that all up, we get to 1.8 million tons per year. And quite frankly, cities and counties don't know what to do with that. And Zero Foodprint has set up essentially a pipeline where we can make those resources available to producers, and that is what is funding our compost connector program. And I can't really think in 1.8 million tons, but I can think in terms of semis. And so 90,000 semis per year is very serious, right? And so that is assuming every city and county complies, but we are on our way there. And so at the end of the day, like I said, we're looking for any way that we can provide funding and resources to producers, and this is one of them. And we realize also that finding compost is not always that easy, especially when there are requirements around the sourcing. And so we came up with potentially a website where it's easy to find that compost. And again, that's we'll provide the link to that. But this is one of the reasons why we are so involved in compost. And so I'll say thank you here, but while I'm taking questions, I'll keep this up so that everyone can have access. These links here will tell you a lot more about the programs, give you, access to applications. Everything is online, and you can reach out to myself and my team using the email available at the bottom. And I'm happy to take questions or help out however I can.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, Leo. Yeah, so let's open it up. We have a few minutes. Questions for Leo or back to Jessica.
I'll jump in. This is Mike. For Leo, refresh us on where does your funding come from? I mean, it sounds great. It sounds like easy money to do the right thing. Is it all coming from customers from some kind of roundup program, or how does that work?
It's a combination, and that's one of the reasons why we have sort of a variety of programs. So at the end of the day, we are bringing in funds, yes, from sort of individuals who choose to donate to Zero Foodprint, which is a nonprofit. We have funding coming from business memberships, essentially joining Zero Foodprint, where they get access to those sort of storytelling assets. And those businesses, like I said, range from your corner coffee shop all the way up to, national brands that are selling, products that are in kind of your everyday grocery store. And then we also, seek out sort of philanthropy as well. Then when we move into more sort of constrained funding, we're getting that specifically with the 1383 and the compost funding. That is coming from California cities and counties looking to comply with the law. And we simply leverage that to get you funding for compost. And then we have other government sources. So the HSP compost connector program is that one is funded by the California Department of Food and Agriculture. And then we are also partnered with a couple more specific grants where we will distribute federal funds, and the majority of those funds come from USDA. And those have even more stringent restrictions. So I didn't put them up here because the programs that are listed here are the much lower bar to entry. I will say we try to make it as easy as possible to access the funds and to have a kind of a person on the other end willing to take a call or respond if you have a question about an application or how a program works.
Thank you.
Great. Other questions, other thoughts from people on the call? Okay, I'm not seeing any. I'm guessing everyone should feel free to reach out to Leo and Jessica with more questions or thoughts if they have them. I want to thank both of you a lot for joining us tonight with this information about these programs. They're exciting, and hopefully we can get some people taking advantage of them. Unless anyone else has anything, there's another question, I think, to you, Jessica. Then why don't we go ahead and wrap up exactly at 7, just like we timed it. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thanks,
Great. Thank you, everybody.
Great presentations. Thank you.
Yeah, and we
Thank
will
you.
post these videos so people can see them later. So thanks, everybody.